F-Zero, the pinnacle of the futuristic racing genre. The reputation and the feedback were mostly great for F-Zero, but no new games were made after 2004's F-Zero Climax. So what the hell happened? This is what I'm going to investigate and find answers in this video. This is the rise and fall of F-Zero. Before talking about F-Zero, let me give you a quick backstory of how everything began. Let me introduce you to Shigeru Miyamoto, a Japanese video game designer, producer and a game director at Nintendo. At young age, Miyamoto initially hoped to become a professional manga artist before considering a career in the video games industry. However, things changed in 1977 when Miyamoto's father arranged an interview with Nintendo's president at the time, Hiroshi Yamauchi, and thus Miyamoto was hired as an apprentice in the planning department. During the late 70s and early 80s, Nintendo was known as a toy company, selling playing cards and other novelties. However, the era of arcade games were also starting to bloom during this time, which Miyamoto was very interested for. This led to Miyamoto work with various games for Nintendo, such as Sheriff in 1979, Radarscope in 1980, the Donkey Kong trilogy between the years 1981 to 1983, and the original Mario Brothers in 1983. During the third generation of video games in the mid-80s, Miyamoto's hot streak kept going forward. He made two of the most momentous titles for the NES and in the history of video games as a whole, Super Mario Brothers in 1985 as well as The Legend of Zelda in 1986. With these two commercially successful games alongside other projects Miyamoto was involved during the arcade and NES era, he was truly making a name for himself at Nintendo, but when the year 1990 was getting closer, a new 16-bit game console called Super Nintendo was about to get released, and this is where the creation of F-Zero begins. In order to make sales for the upcoming Super Nintendo console, there needed to be more advanced video games developed for the system, and the original F-Zero was said to be one of the launch titles. Shigeru Miyamoto worked as a producer for F-Zero alongside his co-workers, with a total of 9 people working in-house for the game. Nintendo wanted to create a futuristic racing game set in a year 2560, where players compete in a high-speed racing tournament called F-Zero. The objective is to beat other opponents and head to the finish line while avoiding hazards, such as slip zones and magnets, that makes the tracks challenging yet intense. Each machine also has an energy bar, so you'd have to be careful and fast at the same time to win the races. The great variety of different machines and tracks provided a lot of fast-paced action for the game. One of Super Nintendo's new innovations, called Mode 7, enabled the game to be represented on a pseudo 3D environment, which was revolutionary for its time. F-Zero also gave birth to one of Nintendo's most known characters, Captain Falcon, which was originally intended to be the mascot for Super NES, but people mostly know him nowadays as a playable character in the Super Smash Bros. Series. F-Zero was released between the years 1990 to 1992 worldwide. It was praised by game critics for its graphical realism, difficulty, and it was also cited as the fastest and the most fluid pseudo 3D racing game of its time. F-Zero shipped almost with 3 million game copies worldwide. There were also updates for F-Zero in Japan only called BS F-Zero Grand Prix 1 and 2, which featured updates and new courses via the Super Famicom's satellite-based expansion. So F-Zero made enough sales for them to justify a sequel for their next console, Nintendo 64, called F-Zero X. After a 7-year hiatus outside Japan, Miyamoto and his in-house development team created a new F-Zero for the N64 titled F-Zero X. This time, however, 3D games were starting to bloom in the mid-90s market, and X was no exception with its visual representation. The buttery smooth 60 FPS, transition from pseudo 3D to full 3D, and solid gameplay were the key elements to keep the sequel consistent with the franchise. The graphical details were to be minimized in order to achieve the high frame rate, which is not a bad thing, as gameplay should always come first before anything else. F-Zero X was released during 1998 with overall positive reception. The game was praised for its fast gameplay, abundance of courses and vehicles, high frame rate and track design. Sadly though, the game had shipped in total of 1.1 million copies, which was almost 2 million less than the first F-Zero game. Nintendo 64 console was also sold 16 million units less than the Super NES, which is a good thing to consider here, but still a letdown nonetheless from a business perspective. There was also an expansion kit to F-Zero X, called the Expansion Kit, released for the Nintendo 64 DD that contained 12 new tracks, a machine creator, a course editor, new soundtracks, as well as a custom cup editor, which added more life to the game, but ultimately was quite niche given the 64 DD's very low sales and the Japan-only restriction. Despite the lower sales of the sequel, Nintendo did not give up yet, as the next entry in the series will be released on the Game Boy Advance, called F-Zero Maximum Velocity. During the early 2000s, Nintendo had plans to create an F-Zero game for their upcoming handheld device, Game Boy Advance. This led Nintendo to join forces with ND Cube, that had its majority of former employees from Hudson Soft, to create one of the GBA's launch titles in 2001, F-Zero Maximum Velocity. The game implements similar pseudo-3D visual techniques akin to Super NES's F-Zero, based on the scaling and rotation effects of bitmap graphics. Gameplay-wise, pretty much of the predecessor Element stayed, but taking the series on a handheld device was something new and fresh for the series. The reception was mostly positive for Maximum Velocity, selling over 1 million copies worldwide, which led to 2 more F-Zero sequels on the GBA, but before that, we take a look at the apex of the series, which is next in the timeline, as we have F-Zero GX for the GameCube. F-Zero GX was a collaboration title with Sega's Amusement Vision, as they did most of the development, and they used AV's enhanced in-game engine for GX that was also used in their Super Monkey Ball game. F-Zero GX was far superior than its predecessors. It had better graphics, high 60 frames per second frame rate, more intense gameplay, and a lot of content put in. There is the classic Grand Prix mode, versus battle, time attack, customize mode where you could create your own vehicles and create decals, and story mode, a first of its kind in the series. GX also had more character development in it, as players got to experience more of Captain Falcon's personality, with a great cast of side characters too. Alongside GX, there was also F-Zero AX, an arcade counterpart game to GX that uses the Triforce arcade system board, which expanded the collaboration with Namco as well. F-Zero GX was released in 2003 worldwide to amass great feedback from reviewers. Many considered GX to be one of the best racers of its time and the greatest racer on the GameCube platform. It was also praised for great visuals, arcade home connectivity, longevity, sharp controls, tough challenges, and fleshed out single-player modes. Most common criticism was pointed out to its story mode's difficulty. While the game was successful on its own right, the sales data tells a different story. In 2018 Edge interview with Toshihiro Nagoshi, an ex-chief creative officer Sega said that F-Zero GX sold over 1.5 million copies worldwide. The GameCube itself is also to blame with its low total of 22 million hardware sales, which should be accounted too. The game sales were disappointing for all the parties involved in the project, and this, partially, was the reason there were no new F-Zero sequels released for the home consoles. Still, however, 2 more GBA F-Zero games were released after GX, so let's take a quick look at those before properly analyzing why the series made its downfall. First, we have F-Zero GP Legend, released between the years 2003 to 2004 for the Game Boy Advance. Suzak was responsible for the development this time, but it was published by Nintendo. It plays similar to the original Super NES of F-Zero by using the pseudo 3D graphics again, dubbed as the new Mode 7. Alongside the basic modes, GP Legend featured a story mode with a series of missions and Zero Test, where players attempt to complete a series of time challenges. There was also a Japan-exclusive e-reader support built in that allowed customers to buy cards that unlocked new machines, courses, challenges, and characters. F-Zero GP Legend received generally favorable reviews, however the game's lower sales was a bad sign for them to keep continuing to do more games. But Suzak did. As their last effort, there was a Japan-exclusive F-Zero, dubbed as the F-Zero Climax, released in late 2004. New Mode 7 technique was used again to achieve the same style of visual presentation and gameplay. While Climax lacked a story mode this time, it featured an edit mode that allowed players to do tracks instead. Reception for the game was also also mixed. There were a lot of reused environments, rehashed courses, and music used from previous GBA titles, making it rather unsatisfying. However, the game featured expanded backgrounds, improved track detail, and is quote-unquote probably the best of the 2D iterations of this franchise, said Daniel Bloodworth. So the question still remains, how did F-Zero met its downfall despite a great start, as we have not seen a new entry for over a decade and a half? Let's break things down step by step. The series declining over time. As more and more F-Zero games were released during its lifespan, the sales of each new entry kept declining, despite the franchise evolving over time, as well as fans and critiques loving the games. The development costs of each game, as well as the many different commercials shown on the television, costed a lot of money for Nintendo. In regards to the decline, this is what Shigeru Miyamoto said in the 2007 Entertainment Weekly interview. In the past, we've worked with some outside development houses on titles like F-Zero and Star Fox, and let me just say that we were disappointed with the results. There was even an anime series known as F-Zero GP Legend, the exact same name the second GBA game had, to boost recognition of the franchise, having 15 episodes for English and 51 episodes released for Japanese audiences, but even this could not keep the series going further past F-Zero Climax. Gameplay too hardcore. The gameplay of F-Zero was cited as too difficult and hardcore for many players, making the target audience more niche in the process. While the gameplay was still solid throughout the series, the difficulty aspect alienated many potential buyers as they catered to other games instead, such as the Mario Kart series. The lack of evolution and innovation. Nintendo likes to innovate with their own gaming franchises to boost marketing and sales, but for F-Zero, it was very difficult to develop new ideas that could work for the game. During the early 2010s, there was hope for a new F-Zero game to be released on the upcoming Wii U console, but these ended up being rumors, and we only got a solo attraction inside Wii U's launch title, Nintendo Land, called Captain Falcon's Twister Race, which was kind of mocking the series with its low-speed courses. F-Zero versus competitors. The futuristic racing genre has a fair amount of competitors in the field, most known being the PlayStation exclusive Wipeout series, which does have a much better track record in terms of sales and longevity of the series, but the games also didn't have as hardcore gameplay behind them. You could argue that even the regular racing games, such as kart racers, would be considered as competitors to F-Zero, as Nintendo's own Mario Kart series has even got some influence with its anti-gravity mechanic in Mario Kart 8, as well as homage to F-Zero with things like the Blue Falcon kart and Big Blue DLC track. Not willing to take a risk with F-Zero. Nintendo is a business after all, developing video games costs a lot of money, and if they cannot make a profit while doing so, it doesn't make sense at all. Shigeru Miyamoto knows, however, that fans do want a new F-Zero game, as he said this in the IGN's 2013 interview. I think where I struggle is that I don't really have a good idea for what's new that we could bring to F-Zero that would really turn it into a great game again. Certainly, I can see how people looking at Mario Kart 8 could see through the anti-gravity and connection to F-Zero, but I don't know, at this point, what direction we could go in with a new F-Zero. To summarize why the rise and fall effect happened to F-Zero was gradually lower sales, lack of evolution and innovation, competitors getting more success in the racing genre, and not willing to take risks with another F-Zero game. In my honest opinion, Nintendo could give F-Zero the same deluxe treatment Mario Kart 8 got on the Switch, with quality of life improvements such as online play, better graphics, and some extra content put in. This would make the costs much lower, more risk-free, and fans will be very likely pleased with just that at this point. Nintendo have been re-releasing older F-Zero games for their modern platforms, which is good for series recognition, but a new title is what the true fans are asking for. But as most of us know already, the downfall of F-Zero was not the end of Shigeru Miyamoto within the gaming industry. Since the F-Zero days, Miyamoto is still working in Nintendo to the present day, as he was involved with many other titles coming up, such as producing Wii Sports in 2006, Super Mario Galaxy in 2007, Splatoon in 2015, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild in 2017, and many other titles. So despite the commercial failure of F-Zero, Shigeru Miyamoto, the man, the legend, turning 70 years old at November 2022, still lives in the hearts of many to this very day as one of the most influential figures in the gaming industry.